know what time it is. Yes! Woo! Get into it! Get into it! Yes! Yes! Hello, lovelies. I'm back. Darkwing Duck. When there's trouble, you call DW. Darkwing Duck. No, I'm just kidding. You know what? I need to make a theme song for Storytime. That is totally going to be a thing next year. I'm going to make a theme song with the whole intro and everything. Just be on the lookout for it, okay? Hi. I'm feeling really good today. It's only a Tuesday, but today is a good day. It's okay to just sit back. Hey, Matt! Thank you for watching. I'm about to start. Kids, I've read Howl's Moving Castle in here, but if you haven't seen the movie by Hayao Miyazaki, you need to go watch it. It's an incredible movie. It's a fantastic film. It was actually nominated for Best Picture back in 2006. Well, it came out in 2006 in the U.S. The following year, that March, they did the Oscars and it was nominated. Unfortunately, it did not win. Thank you. There's a moment in that film, and even in the book, where the lead character, Sophie, she unfortunately has been cursed to be a 90-year-old woman, and she's putting out the laundry. And she looks at Markle, this apprentice to Wizard Howl, and she says, you know, Markle, as you get old, all you ever want to do is look at the scenery. And honestly, at 32 years old, yeah, there are times where I will wake up 2 hours before my alarm on days that I'm working or days that I'm not working. My body just, hey, it's time to get up. And I try to fight it and go back to sleep for another 45 minutes to an hour, but my body is like kicking me like, no, get up, enjoy this day. So there are times where I'll make myself a cup of tea and I'll put on an audiobook or one of my favorite shows, The Golden Girls. And I'll just open my blinds and just watch the world wake up. Just chill. Listen to the birds. Listen to the rustling of the leaves, the cars passing by. Look and see the red-tailed hawks that are flying around. It's peaceful. I say all that to say, if you have time, and if you don't have time, make the time to just sit. No social media, no cell phone. Of course, keep your cell phone with you so you can get in contact with your parents. That's important. Communication is key. But just to listen to your favorite album or album you've been wanting to listen to or something you haven't heard in a long time, or get an audiobook or listen to me for story time, get you a nice juice or a cup of tea, cup of coffee, whatever is your taste, and just sit and listen. Listen! As one of my science teachers back in middle school would say, listen to the world. That's all I want to say. Now, without further ado, we are back. We got to get it with a series of unfortunate events. We are on chapter 9. We only have 4 chapters left. Thank goodness I was able to do quick math, because you know me and math do not get along. Shout out to my algebra 3 teacher, Miss Harrell, for helping me get an A in math consecutively my entire senior year. Shout out to her, but I still don't like math. Pythagorean theorem, when will I? No, I'm just kidding. Oh, goodness. And no, I don't own the music you're listening to in the background, which is brought to you, yet again, by Mr. Ambiance. Please go check them out. Like, share, subscribe. Alright. Chapter 9. Occasionally, events in one's life become clearer through the prism of experience. A phrase which simply means that things tend to become clearer as time goes on. For instance, when a person is just born, they usually have no idea what curtains are and spend a great deal of their first months wondering why on earth mommy and daddy have hung large pieces of cloth over each window in the nursery. But as the person grows older, the idea of curtains becomes clearer through the prism of experience. The person will learn the word curtains and notice that they're actually quite handy for keeping a room dark when it is time to sleep, and for decorating an otherwise boring window area. Which ironically, hold on. I'm gonna turn the camera. I got curtains! And yes, these are thermal curtains, so they completely keep everything dark. and keep the heat in and the cold out. So yes, to support Lemony Snicket's statement, yes, curtains are awesome. Okay. There it is. Yes. Eventually, they will entirely accept the idea of curtains, and may even purchase some curtains of their own, or Venetian blinds, and it is all due to the prism of experience. Coach Genghis's SOAR program, however, was one event that didn't seem to get any clearer at all through the Baudelaire orphans' prism of experience. If anything, it grew even harder and harder to understand because Violet, Klaus, and Sunny became so utterly exhausted as the days, and more particularly the nights, wore on. After the children received their second message from Carmelita Spatz, they spent the rest of the afternoon wondering what Coach Genghis would make them do that evening. The Quagmire triplets wondered along with them, so everyone was surprised. The Baudelaires, who would meet Genghis out on the front lawn after dinner again, and the Quagmires, who tiptoed out of the recital and spied on them in shifts from behind the archway again, when Genghis began blowing his whistle and ordered the Baudelaire orphans to begin running, the Baudelaires and Quagmires thought that surely Genghis would do something far more sinister than more laps. But while the second evening of running laps might have lacked in It's sinisterity? There we go. Sinisterity. Violet, Klaus, and Sunny were too exhausted to notice. They could scarcely hear the shrieks of Genghis's whistle and his cries of, "Keep running!" and "Another lap!" Over the sound of their own desperate panting for breath, they grew so sweaty that the orphans thought they would give up their entire Baudelaire fortune for a good long shower, and their legs grew so sore that the children forgot, even with their prism of experience, what it felt like to have legs that didn't ache from thigh to toe. Lap after lap the Baudelaires ran, hardly taking their eyes off the circle of luminous paint. They still glowed brightly on the darkening lawn, and staring at the circle was somehow the worst part of all. As the evening turned to night, the luminous circle was all the Baudelaires could really see, and it imprinted itself into their eyes so they could see it even when they were staring desperately into the darkness. If you ever had a flash photograph taken and the blob of the flash has stayed in your view for a few moments afterward, then you are familiar with what was happening to the Baudelaires, except the glowing circle stayed in their minds for so long that it became symbolic. The word symbolic here means that the glowing circle felt like it stood for more than merely a track, and what it stood for was zero. The luminous zero glowed in the Baudelaire's minds, and it was symbolic of what they knew of their situation. They knew zero about what Coach Genghis was up to. They knew zero about why they were running endless laps, and they had zero energy to think about it. Finally, the sun began to rise, and Coach Genghis dismissed his orphan track team. The Baudelaires stumbled blearily to the orphan's shack, too tired to even see if Duncan and Isadora were sneaking back to their dormitory after their last shift of spying. Once again, the three siblings were too tired to put on their noisy shoes, so their toes were doubly sore when they awoke, just 2 hours later, to begin another groggy day. Which, for me personally, 2 hours is enough to kind of recharge. I mean, it is a lot to run laps all night long, which is illegal, but 2 hours, and my feet are up and elevated, oh, I'm good. But I'm different. I can't speak for anybody else. And I shudder to tell you this. This was not the last groggy day for the Baudelaire orphans. The dreadful Carmelita Spatz delivered them the usual message at lunch, after they spent the morning dozing through classes and secretarial duties, and the Baudelaires put their heads on the cafeteria table in despair at the idea of another night of promise to double their, of running. The Quagmires tried to comfort them, promising to double their research efforts, but Violet, Klaus, and Sunny were too tired for conversation, even with their closest friends. Luckily, their closest friends understood completely and didn't find the Baudelaire's silence rude or discouraging. It seems impossible to believe that the three Baudelaires managed to survive another evening of SOAR, but in times of extreme stress, one can often find energy hidden even in the most exhausted areas of the body. I discovered this myself when I was woken up in the middle of the night and chased 16 miles by an angry mob armed with torches, swords, and vicious dogs. The Baudelaire orphans discovered it as they ran laps, not only for that night, but also for 6 nights following. This made a grand total of 9 sore sessions, although grand would seem to be the wrong word for endless evenings of desperate panting, sweating bodies, and achy legs. Excuse me. Somebody must have yawned, because yawning is contagious. Hey. For 9 nights, the Baudelaire brains were plagued with the symbolic luminous zero glowing in their minds like a giant donut of despair. As the Baudelaire orphans suffered, their schoolwork suffered with them. As I'm sure you know, a good night's sleep helps you perform well in school, and so if you are a student, you should always get a good night's sleep unless you have to come to the good part of your book, and you should stay up all night and let your schoolwork fall by the wayside. A phrase which here means flunk. The days that followed, the Baudelaires were much more exhausted than somebody who had stayed up all night reading, and their schoolwork did more than fall by the wayside. It fell off the wayside. A phrase which here means different meanings for each child. For Violet, it meant that she was so drowsy that she did not write down a single word of Mr. Remora's stories. For Klaus, it meant that he was so weary that he didn't measure a single one of Mrs. Bass's objects. And for Sunny, it meant that she was so exhausted that she didn't do anything Vice Principal Nero assigned her to do. Baudelaire orphans believed that doing well in school was extremely important, even if the school happened to be run by a tyrannical idiot, but they were simply too fatigued from their nightly laps to do their assigned work. Before long, the circle of luminous paint was not the only zero the Baudelaire saw. Violet saw a zero at the top of her paper when she was unable to recall any of Mr. Remora's stories for a test. Klaus saw a zero in Mrs. Bass's gradebook when he was called on to report the exact length of a tube sock he was supposed to be measuring and was discovered to be taking a nap instead. And Sunny saw a zero when she checked the staple drawer and saw that there were 0 staples inside. "This is getting ridiculous," Isadora said when Sunny updated her siblings and friends at the start of another weary lunch. "Look at you, Sunny. It was inappropriate to hire you as an administrative assistant in the first place. And it's simply absurd to have you crawl laps by night and make your own staples by day." "Don't call my sister absurd or ridiculous," Klaus cried. "I'm not calling her ridiculous," Isadora said. "I'm calling the situation ridiculous." "And ridiculous means you want to laugh at it," said Klaus, who was never too tired to defy words. "And I don't want you laughing at us." "I'm not laughing at you," Isadora said. "I'm trying to help." Klaus snatched his drinking glass from Isadora's side of the table. "Well, laughing at us doesn't help at all, you cake sniffer." Isadora snatched her silverware from Klaus's hands. "Calling me names doesn't help either, Klaus." "Mom damn!" Sunny shrieked. "Oh, stop it, both of you," Duncan said. "Isadora, can't you see that Klaus is just tired? And Klaus, can't you see that Isadora is just frustrated?" Klaus took his glasses off and returned his drinking glass to Isadora. "I'm too tired to see anything," he said. "Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry, Isadora. Being tired makes me crabby. In a few days, I'll turn as nasty as Carmelita Spats." Isadora handed her silverware back to Klaus and patted him on the hand in forgiveness. "You'll never be as nasty as Carmelita Spats," she said. "Carmelita Spats?" Violet said, lifting her head from her tray. She had dozed through Isadora and Klaus's argument, but woken up at the sound of the special messenger's name. "She's not coming here again to tell us to do laps, is she?" "I'm afraid she is," Duncan said ruefully, a word which here means while pointing at a rude, violent, and filthy little girl.
"Hello, cake sniffers," Carmelita said. "Today I have 2 messages for you, so I should really get 2 tips instead of 1.
"Oh, Carmelita," Klaus said, "you haven't gotten a tip for the last 9 days, and I see no reason to break that tradition."
"That's because you're a stupid orphan," Carmelita said promptly. "In any case, message number 1 is the usual. Meet Coach Genghis on the front lawn right after dinner."
Violet gave an exhausted groan. What's the second message?" she asked.
"The second message is that you must report to Vice Principal Nero's office right away."
"Vice Principal Nero's office?" Klaus asked. "Why?"
"I'm sorry,"
Carmelita Spats said with a nasty smile to indicate that she wasn't sorry one bit.
"I don't answer questions from non-tipping orphan cake sniffers."
Some children at the neighboring table laughed when they heard that and began banging their silverware on the table. "Cake sniff..." Oh, excuse me. Cake sniffing orphans in the orphan shack. Cake sniffing orphans in the orphan shack. Cake sniffing orphans in the orphan shack. In the orphan shack. Yeah, yeah. They chanted as Carmelita Spats giggled and skipped off to finish her lunch. They chanted while the Baudelaires sighed and stood up on their aching legs. We better go to Nero's, Violet said. We'll see you later, Duncan and Isadora. Nonsense, Duncan said. We'll walk you. Carmelita Spats has made me lose my appetite, so we'll skip lunch and take you to the administrative building. We won't go inside, otherwise there'll be no silverware between the five of us. But we'll wait outside and you can tell us what's going on. I wonder what Nero wants, Klaus said, yawning. Maybe he's discovered that Genghis is really Olaf all by himself. Isadora said, and the Baudelaires smiled back. They didn't dare hope that this was the reason for their summons to Nero's office, but they appreciated their friend's hopefulness. The five children handed their scarcely eaten lunches to the cafeteria workers, who blinked at them silently from behind their mental masks, and walked to the administrative building. The Quagmire triplets wished the Baudelaires luck, and Violet, Klaus, and Sunny trudged up the steps to Nero's office.
Thank you for taking the time out of your busy orphan schedule to see me,
Vice Principal Nero said, yanking open his door before they could knock.
Hurry up and come inside. Every time I spend talking to you is a minute I can spend practicing the violin. And when you're a musical genius like me, every minute counts.
The three children walked into the tiny office and began clapping their tired hands together as Nero raised both his arms in the air.
There are two things I want to talk to you about, he said when the applause was over. Do you know what they are?
No, sir, Violet replied.
No, sir,
Nero mimicked, although he looked disappointed that the children hadn't given him a longer answer to make fun of.
Well, the first one is that the three of you have missed 9 of my violin concerts, and each of you owes me a bag of candy for each one. 9 bags of candy times 3 equals 29. In addition, Carmelita Spats told me that she has delivered 10 messages to you, and if you include the 2 she delivered today, and that you never given her a tip. That's a disgrace. Now I think a nice tip is a pair of earrings with precious stones, so you owe her 10 pairs of earrings. What do you have to say about that?
Baudelaire orphans looked at one another. They looked at one another with their sleepy eyes. They had nothing to say about it. They had plenty to think about that they could only miss Nero's concerts because Coach Genghis had forced them to, that 9 bags of candy times 3 equals 27, not 29, and that tips are always optional and usually consist of money instead of earrings, but Violet, Klaus, and Sunny were too tired to say anything about it at all. This was another disappointment to Vice Principal Nero, who stood there scratching his pigtails and waiting for one of the children to say something that he could repeat in his nasty, mocking voice. But after a moment of silence, the Vice Principal went on to the second thing.
The second thing, he said, going on, is that you 3 have become the worst students Prufrock Preparatory School has ever seen. Violet, Mr. Remora tells me that you flunked a test. Klaus, Mrs. Bass reports that you can scarcely tell one end of a metric ruler from another. And Sunny, I've noticed that you haven't made a single staple. Mr. Poe told me you were intelligent and hard-working children. But you're just a bunch of cake sniffers.
At this, the Baudelaires could keep quiet no longer. We're flunking school because we're exhausted, Violet cried. And we're exhausted because we're running laps every night, Klaus cried.
Galuka,
Sunny shrieked, which meant, so yell at Coach Genghis, not us. Vice Principal Nero gave the children a big smile, delighted that he was able to answer them in his favorite way.
we're flunking school because we're exhausted,
He squealed.
and we're exhausted because we're running laps every night. Galuka!
Which,
I've had enough of your nonsense. Prufrock Preparatory School has promised you an excellent education, and an excellent education you will get, or in Sunny's case, an excellent job as an administrative assistant. Now I've instructed Mr. Remora and Mrs. Bass to give you comprehensive exams tomorrow. Large tests on absolutely everything you've learned so far. Violet, you better remember every detail of Mr. Remora's stories, and Klaus, you better remember the length, width, and depths of Mrs. Bass's objects, or I will expel you from school. As I found a bunch of papers that need to be stapled tomorrow, Sunny, you will staple all of them with homemade staples, or I will expel you from your job. First thing tomorrow morning, we will have the test and the stapling. And if you don't get A's and make enough staples, you'll leave Prufrock Preparatory School. Luckily for you, Coach Genghis has offered to homeschool you. That means he'd be your coach, your teacher, and your guardian, all in one. It's a very generous offer, and if I were you, I'd give him a tip too. Although I don't think earrings are appropriate in this case.
We're not going to give Count Olaf a tip, Violet blurted out. Klaus looked at his older sister in horror. Violet means Coach Genghis, Klaus said quickly to Nero. I do not, Violet cried. Klaus, our situation is too desperate to pretend not to recognize him any longer.
Shifichu,
Sunny agreed. I guess you're right, Klaus said. What have we got to lose?
what do we got to lose?
Nero mocked.
What are you talking about?
We're talking about Coach Genghis, Violet said. He's not really named Genghis. He's not even a real coach. He's Count Olaf in disguise.
Nonsense, Nero said.
Violet was going off. Okay. Klaus wanted to say nonsense right back at Nero in Nero's own repulsive way, but he bit his exhausted tongue. It's true, he said. He's put a turban over his eyebrow and expensive running shoes over his tattoo, but he's still Count Olaf.
He has a turban for religious reasons, Nero said, and running shoes because he's a coach. Look here.
He strode over to the computer and pressed a button. The screen began to glow in its usual seasick way and once again showed a picture of Count Olaf.
You see? Coach Genghis looks nothing like Count Olaf, and my advanced computer system proves it.
Ushilo,
Sonny cried, which meant, that doesn't prove anything.
Ushilo.
Nero mocked.
Who am I going to believe? An advanced computer system or two children flunking school and a little baby too dumb to make her own staples? Now stop wasting my time. I will personally oversee tomorrow's comprehensive exams, which will be given in the orphan check. And you better do excellent work, or it's a free ride from Coach Genghis. Sayonara, Baudelaires.
Sayonara is the Japanese word for goodbye, and I'm sure that each and every one of the millions of people who live in Japan would be ashamed to hear their language used by such a revolting person. But the Baudelaire orphans had no time to think such international thoughts. They were too busy giving the Quagmire triplets the latest news. This is awful, Duncan cried as the 5 children trudged across the lawn so they could talk things over in peace. There's no way you can get an A on those exams, particularly if you have to run laps tonight. This is dreadful, Isadora cried. There's no way you can make all those staples, either. You'll be homeschooled before you know it. Coach Genghis won't homeschool us, Violet said, looking out at the front lawn where the luminous Zero was waiting for them. He'll do something much, much worse. Don't you see? That's why he made us run all those laps. He knew we would be exhausted. He knew we'd flunk our classes or fail to perform our secretarial duties. He knew we'd be expelled from Proof Rock Prep. Then he could get his hands on us. Klaus groaned. We've been waiting for his plan to be made clear, and now it is, but it might be too late. It's not too late, Violet insisted. The comprehensive exams are until tomorrow morning. We must be able to figure out a plan by then.
Plan,
Sonny agreed. It'll have to be a complicated plan, Duncan said. We have to get Violet ready for Mr. Remora's test, and Klaus ready for Mrs. Bass's test. And we have to make staples, Isadora said, and the Baudelaires still have to run laps. And we have to stay awake, Klaus said. The children looked at one another, and then out at the front lawn. The afternoon sun was shining brightly, but the 5 youngsters knew that soon it would get behind the tombstone-shaped buildings, and that it would be time for soar. And they didn't have much time. Violet tied her hair up in a ribbon to keep it out of her eyes. Klaus polished his glasses and set them on his nose. Sunny scraped her teeth together to make sure they were sharp enough for any task ahead, and the 2 triplets took their notebooks out of their sweater pockets. Coach Genghis's evil plan had become clear through the prism of the Baudelaire and Quagmire's experiences, and now they had to use their experience to make a plan of their own. Alrighty, that is where we will end for today. This story is going to turn quickly. I'm going to just fair warn you right now. It's one of my favorite out of the 13 books in this series. But I'm telling you, there will be a point where it will shock you. So, keeps you on the edge of your seat. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.